Hello and welcome to this brief screencast on Meteor methods. So let's start by going back and thinking about traditional web apps. And as we talked about in the last screencast, in a traditional web app, there's a database on the server side, and the server communicates with clients via HTTP, passing strings back and forth, and then the client is responsible for building some kind of data structure based upon the data that is given back to from the server, and presumably by accessing the database. And so there's no real worries in some sense about the who gets to manipulate the database in a traditional web app. It's obviously only the server side that can manipulate the database, because clients don't even have a database. They just have data structures that they build based upon these strings that are passed to them. In Meteor, it's a little bit different. When you say Meteor new, foo or whatever, Meteor create foo, and it creates this kind of hello world package or hello world system, it includes this thing called the insecure package. And the insecure package does two things. The first thing it does is says that that in Meteor, in all cases, both the clients and the servers have a database. Okay, with the insecure package, that enables both clients and servers to directly manipulate the database. So a client can call insert on the database, they can call delete on the database, they can call update on their local database, and then what Meteor does is propagates the changes from this client may have made on their copy of the database around to all of the other databases that are connected. So Meteor, in a sense, is always responsible for kind of keeping these databases synchronized. And what the insecure package does is says that not only can the server directly manipulate the database, but the clients can also manipulate it. Okay? And the way that looks in code, for example, let's say you have an event handler for a form that you've constructed, and you may go to all sorts of pains to make sure that that you have a schema, and you make sure that all the fields obey the schema, and you validate it, and you only call your database insert operation in the event that you've made sure that that data is just perfectly okay to be inserted into the database. So given this kind of code, you may ask yourself, why do I care if I can call insert in a client? Because look at my form. My form's making sure that I'm not adding any data into the database that I haven't already made sure is fine to be in the database. Okay? Well, if that was the only way that a client could manipulate the database, then I think that would be okay. The problem is there's other ways. Because given that you have, here we have the application running in the client, it's possible for a user to bring up the console, and then by typing a line of code, they can now have access to any collection in your database. I'm getting access to the contacts collection. And once I have the access to the contacts collection, I could call, for example, find.fetch to get all of the records in that collection. Okay? Well, if I can do that, then I could also call the remove function on, passing it the ID of the first element of this thing, and I've all of a sudden removed an element of this collection. Okay, well, now that I can do that, you could imagine me calling update and changing this owner field from a valid ID to the string booyah. Okay, so the problem is that it's now that we can go around the whole form validation thing, we can manipulate the database in all sorts of problematic ways that basically corrupt it, and those changes will be propagated to all of the other databases, including the server. So this is clearly not a good thing, right? You don't want the client to have unrestricted access, okay, to the database. That's just crazy. All right, so how do we fix that? Well, what we do in Meteor to fix that is, first, we got to disable the ability of clients to manipulate the database, and secondly, what we do is we construct an API for clients to modify the database that ensures that any modifications are made in a consistent semantically valid manner. And this API is basically a set of Meteor methods that are written by the developer and which are made available to clients to invoke. Okay, so instead of this former situation in which clients could call insert, delete, update, etc. directly on their local database and have things propagated around, once we've removed the insecure package, then the only way that the client can actually change a database is by calling a method, which has been defined by the developer, resides on the server side, in some sense. I guess, there's a little bit of craziness there with the optimistic UI. But at any rate, for starters, think of this as being code that gets run on the server side in a kind of a protected way, can guarantee that whatever changes the client is requesting by invoking this method are semantically legal. And then, if so, then the insert, delete, update occurs on the server database and then is propagated out to all of the clients afterwards. Now there's this thing called the optimistic UI where these Meteor methods are constructed to be run on the client database immediately, expecting that the client's not going to be doing something crazy, and then also run on the server. And if the server side invocation discovers there's a problem, then that change gets rolled back. So the idea is you make a more responsive user interface because clients don't have to wait for the server, this round trip to the server to figure out things are okay. Meteor will just assume it's going to be okay, make the change, and then you see the change instantly, and only in the case where you did something bad would a second or two later, or sometime later, the screen reverts to the previous state. So anyway, this is how production mode, you would do things. You're going to use Meteor methods that specify an appropriate API to clients to manipulate their own database. Okay, so the first thing is we want to remove that crazy ability, and that's just a simple matter of saying Meteor remove insecure, which removes the insecure package. And now I'm showing you again, I can still get access to the collection. I can still, in fact, call find.fetch and get all the elements of the collection. Remember, I can still get it's in a sense, removing insecure gives you read access. So you still have collections. You can still look at them. You can still see what's in them because obviously I'm displaying this table here with data. Where things go awry for our unscrupulous user is when they try to actually remove an element of a collection. Now that the insecure package is removed, we get this error message saying access denied. And so the client can see the database, can manipulate, can look at the contents of the database, but cannot change the contents of the database using the database operations on the client side. Instead, what they have to do is they have to use the API, which is the Meteor method. So here's an example. On the server side, the developer has defined this thing called a Meteor method called contacts.insert, which takes a contact, does some checking, and then in the final, if everything's okay, it's going to call the database operation insert. Then on the client side, the client calls that Meteor method, passing it an argument, and then there's a little callback that says what it should do in the event that once the method succeeds. Okay? So that's basically it. Consult the Meteor guide for details on methods. They're not very hard to use once you kind of grow the rationale for them. This guide has actually an interesting, more advanced kind of structure for methods called validated methods, which is once you kind of get, I would say the first time you use methods, you just do it the simple way. Then once you start writing more production apps, you'll want to move to this validated method because it enables you to kind of build your system in a more modular way. All right, thanks a lot.